Welcome to Joe's Place, the Joe Giannotti podcast. Tonight's guests are the co-founders of Affluminder, a socially healthier way forward. Their mission is to dissolve the stigma around mental illness by changing the narrative around it. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an incredibly horrific impact upon the mental health of society, which we will be seeing for many years to come. Tonight, Joe's Place begins a new series on the lasting aftermath of the mental health pandemic surrounding COVID that has tragically already had very devastating results. We will discuss all of this and how the narrative can be changed with my guests, Renee Lynn and Jeffrey Meyers. Hello, everyone. Good evening. This is the third straight night of Joe's Place podcasts. This is now episode 16. I am your host, Joe Giannotti, and thank you for watching. Let us get right into our guest this evening. First thing I'm going to have to do, because for the second night in a row, I had a technical issue which occurred with 15 seconds left before the countdown went down to 0. So let's get into tonight's guest, who is the co-founders of Affluminder. This is affluminder.com. And the mission is to dissolve the stigma around mental illness by changing the narrative around it. The vision: a world where people with a mental illness are not prejudged for having a mental illness and thrive without stigma-induced oppression. And the theory of change: by providing society a positive term for mental illness, the narrative around neurodivergence will become supportive as opposed to oppressive. My guests this evening, and it's a great honor to have both of them on, Jeffrey Meyers and his wife, Renee Lynn. Good evening, Jeffrey and Renee. I hope you're having a great night, and also good evening to Mackenzie.
Mackenzie, yes.
Yes. I need to have one disclaimer before we begin, and I think it's a very important disclaimer. I have known Renee for well over a decade. Renee is one of my closest friends' sister-in-law. And that's how I also know Mackenzie, because Mackenzie is 12 years old, and Mackenzie as a puppy was the cutest puppy. And what a beautiful, beautiful dog.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. And thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Absolutely.
As I said, I wanted to start a series because this is the pandemic that's going to last much, much longer than COVID.
Yeah.
Agreed.
The mental health pandemic, which has already been devastating in the United States and most of the Western world, is going to be even worse because of what we have sadly done to our future.
Exactly.
With all of this, and especially what the corporate medical establishment has done with everything going on. So
it is a pandemic that has already started years ago.
Exactly. And I want to start because this is a relatively new company, Affluminder. When did it start? When did the company begin?
It started, I would only say maybe 4 months ago or 5 months ago. We're not offering services yet. We are still in the brainstorming phase. And that is because the topic of mental health is encompassing so many parts of everybody's life. Obviously, the medical field is very important. And we are not physicians, we are not clinicians, we are not certified psychiatrists. We are talking from our own passion and our own experience. So we're in the stage where we are meeting people to collaborate with and building up our team and brainstorming exactly what route we want to take.
The theory of Affluminder actually started about 1.5 years ago in a discussion we had about mental illness and the idea of how we could have a positive impact. So the business started recently, but the idea of it started long ago.
Yep. It was on our 10-year goals that we made and our 1-year goal actually last year.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is I want to start from the beginning. So first off, congratulations on your wedding.
Yeah. Well, yes. To everybody who doesn't know, and they may not know, we did elope.
Well, they might now, and I'm sorry if I was the one who spoiled it.
No, you're not. No. We have been open about it. My parents found us out. My dad actually cornered me in an alleyway and was like, "Things feel different. Did you guys get married?" And I was like, "Dad, you have to talk to Jeff about this. I have nothing to do with this."
Well,
I'll be getting phone calls tonight that
no, you'll be fine. They all know.
Now, but I want to start from the beginning because actually this is very important because we're going to start from the very beginning for both of you, and then I want you to talk about how you both met because that is a very important part of this.
Yeah.
So first things first, I want to talk about, we're talking about mental illness, and I want you both to start with that part of it on how you became interested in the topic and why you are, why is Affluminder formed?
Yeah. So I'll start. It's a little bit of a long story. I have an identical twin brother. That'll be important in a minute. At age 11, I haven't seen my mother since. She abandoned me, and that kind of created a chip on my shoulder of wanting to create the perfect Americana. And so I had this anger inside me. You've seen the story on TV or in movies, and you fast forward through life, and I accomplished by what society says is some pretty amazing things. I ran the Boston Marathon in the top 5%, finished in the top 5%. I was a professional athlete for ultimate Frisbee. These things are celebrations of society, and really what society is celebrating is my mental illness of bipolar and the notion of hypomania and even manic. At age 34, I suffered a trauma, and I went manic. My mind actually broke, if you will. And as you can tell, I'm not a lunatic. I'm not insane. I'm just another human with unique brain like all of us. And that trauma, which if you want, Joe, we can get into a little bit more, that trauma led me into attempting suicide twice and going to the psych ward, or as I like to call it, the mental health spa, 3 times. And what's interesting is I am CEO of a very successful architectural firm here in Cleveland, Ohio. And we're one of the design firms here. I have a staff currently of 20. I've had a staff of up to 30. I've been able to grow the business in 8 times the revenue of when I became partner at age 30. It's a legacy firm. I started in 1983. That founder, he invested in me. He believed in me, and believed in me because at that time we didn't know, because of my bipolar and my ability to connect to people and to think quickly and uniquely. And ultimately, I was able to create a culture of success, a culture of trust, and the ability to fail. And if you fail and you learn, it's not a failure, it's a learning opportunity. So I went through this trauma. It took me about 3 years, and I was what I called in survival mode. And survival mode is the notion of trying to stay alive. My every thought was about staying alive and or trying to die. And my psychiatrist, my therapist, the doctors and nurses, and all the people at the mental health spa, their purpose was to make sure that I survived. And when I was in those at the first 3 years, no one talked about anything more than just stabilizing. Jeff, if you work hard enough, you can be a part of society again. And, luckily for me, I was able to become a partner of the firm before I had my manic episode. And after 3 years, I realized, all right, I have now accepted the fact that I am not bipolar. I have bipolar. And I say hashtag proudly bipolar because there is a superpower there. And we believe there's a superpower in everybody. And so once I realized that I'd stabilized, I needed to do a couple of things. I needed to find psychological safety. I needed to understand that those who I had hurt could forgive me, including my own twin brother, who we had a very sour relationship because of, by the way, does not have bipolar. And this proves that it's not a genetic thing. We're all genetically loaded, but it depends on the trauma that you have. And mine was at age 34. Ultimately, I moved to stabilization. I worked on myself, and at some point, we might get to what I call the self-purpose pyramid. And I was able to build myself back up from just surviving to stabilization, and then ultimately to what I call thriving. And when I started the journey of thriving is when I met Renee.
Yep, I know.
And before I get into Renee's story, this is the self-purpose pyramid that we will discuss tonight. And this is just looking at this in the past 20 minutes. This is a really, really great graphic. And I think all 7 of these together are so vital for a human life. And that is something, as I said, we'll discuss that. I would want to discuss this in depth this evening.
Sure.
Because during the pandemic, many of these things were broken completely.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't only apply to rehabilitation. It applies to even the smallest rehabilitation of having a bad day.
Right.
So it's very scalable.
Exactly. So Renee, please share your story on how you've become interested in this topic.
Well, very different than Jeff's. I am diagnosed with ADHD, and I was diagnosed by a PCP doctor, my primary care doctor here in Cleveland. I went for a hearing test because my boss at the time said that I wasn't listening to him, and I spitefully went to prove to him that I was indeed listening to him. I just may have disagreed with him or didn't disagree with his priorities. So I went to get a hearing test done. The doctor came out and said, your hearing is perfect. However, I have some other questions to ask you. And he gave him the typical ADHD test and diagnosed me with adult ADHD. I was familiar with it. I had taken Adderall before, and I was now diagnosed it. And I thought it was something like a magic pill that got me to focus, but it applied to everybody. I moved to Cleveland from New York, where I know Joe and where my family is. Because I was actually engaged to my ex-fiance, who is a clinician here, who used to joke around saying I had ADHD. But he never actually told me what it was, and I never looked into it because I just knew there was a stigma about it. There was a stigma that you were dumber than other people. And I had dealt with that my entire life. I was called ditzy. Actually, my high school yearbook gave me the award for being definitely ditzy or dizzy, as they described it, for just spacing out sometimes. And that is kind of a way that women do show the symptoms of ADHD. I was very smart. I have a high IQ. I was in honors classes my entire life since elementary school. I am very competitive. I am aggressive in sports, although I'm clumsy. And Joe, as you know from my basketball years, one of my famous moves to kind of trick up the referees was I would either do a back bend or a split, and they didn't know if that was a jump ball or if that was a foul on the other team.
Oh, jeez.
But usually I just fell. So
Oh, jeez.
You remember those days, right?
I do. And that I also remember that was also the last time that Beth Page made it to the semifinals in girls basketball. Funny I mentioned Beth Page because I had to mention them on Monday night when I was on with Mindy LaFavors. And we were discussing how Bethpage has become the epicenter of the school mask mandate saga. Because the president of the Board of Education, who, by the way, is invited to come on Joe's Place at any point, as well as the superintendent, because the issue will not be solved by February 10th, I have decided to do a podcast episode about it. And I think this is going to be a very controversial episode, I'm sure, but they just show that masks don't work. Cloth masks just don't work. The only masks that work, and reading this from Steve Kirsch, who, of course, works with experts at the highest level of all this, okay? The epidemiologists he talks to, the doctors he talks to are at the highest levels. These are not just random low-level people. Peter McCullough, for example, is the most published person in the history of his field.
Yeah.
So, and sorry for going into the
No. We understand it's important, because now we're talking about experts. What about talking to personal opinions? What I think is really missing, and that's one of the big reasons why we're here tonight, is that the voice of the common people, the voice of people that are actually the kids that are actually in the school. For me, with ADHD, a mask is extremely distracting. Extremely. I convince myself I can't breathe. I convince myself I should wear my makeup. I convince myself that I'm not smiling enough, which is a whole nother woman issue. But I convince that I'm giving like a mean face. And I walk through the streets, I walk through the stores worried. And this is part of ADHD. This is part of my sensitivity. Being oversensitive, especially because I've been taught with ADHD to kind of oppress my emotions, and people are constantly judging me because I'm going to mess up at some point or appear stupid or lazy. My appearance is very important. Yeah. And this mask, the mandates that are going through restaurants and just in public, is very distracting, to the point that this hurts my heart still, but Mackenzie, as you saw, that cute little dog on there, I was walking to a coffee shop and the guy right away goes, "You need a mask." And I was like, "I don't have a mask." And she was walking behind me. I held the door open for her. He scared me and I went to go grab a mask. I dropped the leash out of panic. ADHD, you focus on the most alarming thing. And the heavy door smashed her in her face and she fell over. And I called Jeff crying and I was like, "Oh my God, this door weighs like 1,000 pounds, maybe like, I don't know, like 15, but it was still really heavy." And I was like, "Mackenzie just fell over. I think I broke her nose. I think she's hurt." And I was like, "And this stupid mask thing, like," and that's exactly why talking to the real people out there is also very important, because this mask stuff really screws us up in a lot of different ways. And that's just one of the things that we need to talk to everybody about it, and we need everyone's opinion, especially in Bethpage.
And I just want to say this. I am not anti-mask. I'm actually pro-mask. However, I'm pro-data and I'm anti-mandates. Yep. And I will say, let me just add that because the data shows that cloth masks don't work, and I have not worn a cloth mask since July of 2020. The only mask I wear, and it's funny because I always point in that direction, because I have KN95 masks, and I am the only person that I know, and I'm probably the only person in America who, after I wear the mask, I immediately throw it out because I don't want bacteria. I don't want that bacteria buildup that goes on these masks that these kids are putting, and people are putting on and off, on and off, on and off. The amount, that's a whole other issue.
Especially sneezing in a mask. We had a discussion on an airplane about sneezing in a mask. He like sneezed in his mask. And I was like, "Ew, sneeze in your arm." Which is weird. But not in the mask, because we're on an airplane. You have one mask. And he's like, "But we're wearing the mask because you're supposed to sneeze into yourself." But I'm like, "Yeah, but it's also polite to sneeze into your armpit." And or not armpit, but your elbow. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm literally conflicted.
Right. But then there's hypocrisy, because... And I will start with the president of the Board of Ed. Once again, he's invited to come on because he could explain why he was not wearing a mask when he made the announcement that masks were being reinstituted in the district.
Was he around anybody else, or was he just alone?
Yeah, no, he was around there were 300 people in the room. There were 3 people that were not wearing masks. It was one assistant. It was the superintendent, the president of the board, and the assistant superintendent. And next to them were 6 other board members who were all wearing masks.
Yeah, well, probably because they were asymptomatic, and you can't spread the virus if you're asymptomatic, and we know that now.
So I do want to bring it back to your original question, which we
go right ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Everybody here, everybody that's listening, I'm sure is very, very passionate about some of the topics we're talking about. I want to bring it back to Affluminder.
Yes.
Renee told most of her story. I'm not sure if you want to tell any more. And I want to get to the point where how we met and how we developed the concept of Affluminder.
And that's exactly what I want, because this is a very important part of Affluminder.
We're biased. We love this story.
It's quite okay.
Yeah. And so I was talking about
Please share. Go right ahead.
Yep. So when I lived in New York, pretty much my entire life except for college. I went down to Tampa, St. Petersburg, actually in Florida. And I came back, and in New York, I had a career, I had a life. I lived in Queens. I worked 3 jobs as a bartender, a promotional model, my full-time job as a chemist, makeup chemist. And aside from some bullying that I got from like being different, I guess, and some ditziness, I would say, or just being like really like passionate about some things at my full-time job, everything else I was really thriving at, and I was very happy. And I was in a PhD program with Stony Brook University out in Stony Brook on Long Island. And then when I found out we were moving to Cleveland, I switched that to a master's, and I got my master's in material science engineering. Now I went from literally being like functioning on 4 hours of sleep, driving, working, social life, working, work life, family life, everything, to Cleveland, where I had nothing. And I was studying for the LSATs because I wanted to go to law school, and I still do. And then I couldn't concentrate, and I couldn't focus, and I went into a very deep depression, lashing out, just not acting like somebody I recognized. So our relationship fell apart. We got unengaged, and I decided to stay in Cleveland so that I wouldn't be judged going back to New York for failing. And I was determined to thrive in Cleveland. And I started doing that. The ADHD diagnosis definitely helped because I was able to get Adderall. I was able to take it to focus only when I needed it, still not when I'm not working, because I can focus on things I'm passionate about. It's more of the mundane kind of stuff that I can't do. So that kind of leads into when I met Jeff, because I was still learning about ADHD and still accepting that as mental illness. I didn't start talking about it until I met Jeff.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm proud of is being proudly bipolar, and I tell almost everybody I meet. And again, just a reminder for the audience, I am CEO of an architectural firm here in Cleveland, and I speak openly about being bipolar and about the benefits and the weaknesses that I have because of that. But that's not different than anybody else. And I told Renee, second date, I walk in and she goes, "Who are you and what are your intentions?" And I was like, can I get a glass of whiskey, please? And I went through my life story, which I very much abbreviated tonight. And you would think that Renee would have said, "Thank you, it was very nice. I'm glad that we met a second time, and be on your way." But she was already providing me psychological safety. I just met her, and she's already showing me this love, compassion that she has, and says, "All right, well, you're honest, man. You're direct. Let's see where this goes." And
that was a big reason why. Back to our mentioning Affluminder now, a big part of what we believe in our core values, and integrity is one of them. And even though I wasn't talking about ADHD, I knew it was still a part of me. I didn't hide anything anymore, like my symptoms, but I didn't know how to talk about it. And then here's Jeff openly talking about bipolar and letting me know like what a normal day is in his life, and how many medications he takes, and how much stress he has in his psychiatrists and his doctors, which we'll get to later.
Yeah.
And that was really empowering, because it wasn't so much like I was judging this guy, like, okay, are you going to be like a guy that we casually see, or is it going to be somebody that is more serious? I looked at him.
Mackenzie knew right away that it wasn't going to be casual. She knew right away that it was serious.
Mackenzie knows, but I was like, wow, you are an inspiration, because I am dealing with my own mental illness that society has claimed a mental illness, even though I just think it's neurodivergent. I thrive in different environments, just as some people do. And I was like, you are giving me a way to describe this and openly accept it. And I was really inspired by him. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know how he got the strength. And I wanted to know how he got that respect, especially his employees. And you'll learn now or later that like Jeff hasn't lost a single employee this entire pandemic. He actually grew his business. Yeah. And the way he writes emails is astonishing. But like, it's just, there was a lot there that I knew that I wanted to learn. And even though the word Affluminder wasn't there, it was the definition, which is an Affluminder is a person with a mental illness or mental disorder. We'll get into that later as well. That is thriving and is not oppressed by society's stigma. And that is a person that was facing me on that second date. And there is nobody, there's a lot of people stronger, but that's a very strong person, I would say. I'm thinking about like Navy SEALs and people that like
physically stronger,
but mentally stronger too.
We should see about that.
Yeah, you could definitely do. But you know what I mean.
Affluminder wiener.
Right, that goes into that.
That's Mackenzie, by the way.
But that is why like I agreed to the third date, and actually like shortly after that we agreed that we would never spend a night apart unless I was just like a vacation or something like that. But yeah. And that was it. It was like, actually, so he kind of used the superpower of being Affluminder, not having the stigma to show his strength. And, if I'm a biologist at heart, that was my undergrad in biochemistry. And evolution was always a favorite topic of mine. Genetics, evolution.
I'm just a research project.
Yeah, a research project. But like females, males, when you're looking for a partner to make offspring with, you are looking for the strongest mate. And when I met him and we talked about this, I knew that he was so strong in that. And that was something that I aspired to be like and somebody that I needed in my life.
Wow. And it was at such an important time because at that time, if I read your bio correctly, that is when the hospital system in New York City was starting to it was on the border of getting overwhelmed.
Yep.
And again, New York being the first epicenter in the United States. So now, even though it hasn't occurred in anywhere else in the United States yet, that connection was very, very important for what was to come.
Yep, it was because we're in Cleveland, but I was in New York. And when they were shutting down the country and we heard that everything was shutting down, I was actually in Tampa with my friend James Scott. And we saw the news. We went out that night and we were like, wow, the world's about to change and we don't know what's going to happen. The next morning, I changed my flight to fly to New York. I rented a car. I picked up my dog, Mackenzie, and my sister, because my sister was very nervous about my dad. And my dad ended up getting COVID the week after because he's a New York City bus driver. And my sister wouldn't even look at me, wouldn't talk to me. She literally dropped my dog out of the house. And Mackenzie was like, what's going on? And then hopped down the stairs when she saw me. And I picked her up and we drove right to Cleveland. And then I got a text message from Jeff and I accepted his first date. And our first date was that Friday of the first lockdown. Yeah. So there was no fancy dinner. There was no romancing. We actually went for a walk in the park with my friends.
That's romancing.
It was romancing.
Yeah.
The simple things.
Yeah, the simple things, right.
Yes. And however, it's now the Friday. And again, you're, of course, worried about your dad because the next week he gets COVID.
Exactly.
And he got COVID as the hospitalizations are skyrocketing in New York.
They were, but it was a little confusing. And it was confusing because they had the tents set up outside of all these hospitals for extra people. And my dad went and his oxygen level was like a 92 and wasn't low enough to go into the hospital. Thank God. Now knowing what we know. But the hospitals weren't filled. They were just they were like guarding them from getting filled. And it was really misleading because I'm talking to my dad, who's literally going to the hospital. Like, you can talk to Buck about this, like going there, like every few days, every 2 days. My dad was pretty sick for about 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And he was going back and forth, and they kept like denying him, but they weren't filled. And it was more of like what I was hearing on the news was different than what I'm hearing from my parents, who are actually like in New York getting this stuff in Long Island, which is not New York City, but it's, you know, it's not upstate, but you know what I'm saying? So like, it's just different. And it was a very confusing time.
I think it's
Scary.
important. I think it's important to bring up the fact that Renee's mother is actually naturally immune to COVID. She's been in the house. She was, right by him when COVID was happening. Since then, we've had COVID. Her sister has had COVID. Buck, who you know, has had COVID, and her mother has never gotten COVID. And so I think that's important to bring up with some of the topics we might discuss tonight. Is there is natural immunity to it, and there are people who say there's not, and that's just not true.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
and that's the key thing, because we'll get into vaccines and mental health in a little bit. But now we're talking about mental health and COVID now. Because now what you started to hear in March and April of 2020 are horrible stories. One that sticks out vividly to me is an 11-year-old boy who committed suicide because the kid was stuck in his house all day playing video games. And it was very, very quickly where we found out that this was having a terrible impact on anyone under the age of 30.
We're not medical professionals, but from our personal lives, my personal life, I know that isolation is the worst thing I can do. As somebody who needs to connect to society, to have camaraderie, to have love, to find purpose, and as part of that paradigm there, paradigm and pyramid that we talked about. We'll talk about the upside down pyramid, hopefully, but self-isolation is the beginning of the thoughts of suicide. And here we are. I own my own business, right? So I felt that part of it. I also felt the part that, my grandmother's older and what happens. And so they're at war at that time, two different thoughts there. But the notion that there wasn't even self-isolation, there was mandated isolation. And man, I can't imagine how I would have dealt with the notion of not having somebody like Renee in my life right at that moment, because all my closest friends who I work with, I'm blessed to work with so many people I love. They were isolated from me. My dad is a cancer survivor. He was isolated from me. My brother has 2 children. He was isolated from me. Joe, I'm not sure if I would have made it through, even though I was on my thrival place. I could see a big setback by the forced isolation that America and the world had to have. And
right. And like that, again, me just being who I am, kind of denied the isolation right away. and I didn't listen to it. I obviously met Jeff. We started dating during that time. We kept a very big quarantine, about like 10 people. And I was out and about, and I pushed my limits until they told me I couldn't. And that was because I just didn't know how to live. And if I followed the rules and I was like stuck to my house, it would be so detrimental. And even a few times that like I was like supposed to be quarantined, like I'm not evil for doing it. I was diagnosed with COVID and I walked around. I went places because I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is not good for me. And it's just me defying public stuff. And like, if I wasn't sick and I wasn't symptomatic where I felt like I had to stay home, I was not going to stay home. And my intuition was telling me this is wrong. This is not the right thing to do. And this is not fair. And part of my superpowers and my weaknesses is that my intuition takes over and I refuse to.
It's also not a natural human reaction.
It's not.
Human beings, the overwhelming majority of human beings, are social creatures.
Right.
We're supposed to be in social settings. Now, there are very few human beings, and I will be the first to admit I am one of them. I've always thrived being alone. At my former full-time job, I work by myself. I have worked at secondary jobs with other people. However, one thing as a public address announcer that you'll notice, I more lately when I've done work, I haven't worked in 2 years, but toward the end of me being a public address announcer, what I would do is I would always put headphones on, because for good PA announcers, and most good PA announcers wear headphones, they have to tune out all ambient noise. And for me, I always had that feel where I could do a good job, I have to pretend that there's no crowd.
Yeah. That
all I see are the teams that are on the field or court or wherever place of sport that they're located, and just cut out all ambient noise.
What you
describes my hyper focus.
Well, you described a couple of things. First, you described your uniqueness, and we all have uniqueness, and that makes us
100%.
And you also described what I would call your superpower, the ability to tune out other people. Not everybody could do that. What you described in one way is Renee's hyper focus, her ability to look at something in like what she can do with some processes, with website design, with house design, is hyper focused on it. And it's amazing. The other thing from my standpoint, my war chest of cognitive skills from my therapist is that they always tell me to stay in the moment, Jeff. Stay in the moment. Don't worry about the future so much. It's undefined. Don't worry about the past. It built you, but it doesn't define you. Stay in the moment. And I fight and I struggle to do that. And what Renee was talking about, I believe, is that she automatically stays in the moment. And whatever's happening at that moment is what's going on. And so you have bipolar and ADHD, which creates its own uniqueness in a relationship, a lot of strengths and a lot of things that we've had to overcome because of it.
Exactly. A lot of the skills that are taught, like your skills.
Yes.
And that's actually one of the main things of Affluminder. It's that what we haven't developed our business services yet, but we have a lot of, we pretty much know what we're doing, but they're still in the brainstorm process. And we really want to focus on people's skill from their neurodivergence, on how does their brain work and how does it work optimally and how does it excel at some skills that other people cannot. Or like, even if somebody like practices and focuses on it, I mean, I could take singing lessons all I want. I could never be like an Adele or Taylor Swift, you know? But like, that's what mental illness is, or mental disorder, or neurodivergence, is the fact that like you have this superpower that if it is trained and you do focus on it in a positive way and bring it up to and use it effectively, you could do amazing things.
And this movement that we're starting, it will create a paradigm shift. It will create an army of Affluminders who will change the world in a positive way that won't be oppressed. Right. And the end of that movement will be winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And when I say we, I don't mean me and Renee. I mean we, the world. We're going to win the Nobel Peace Prize. We're going to start a movement, and we're not only going to change the societal stigma, but more importantly for me, I met a young woman in the psychiatric ward, and she just graduated from architectural school. And she didn't believe that she could become anything. She was stigmatized. She was also African American, which
she is also African American.
Yeah, she wasn't. She is. So she had a big way to come in. We became close friends, and I'm so proud that she sits right across the desk from me, and she now believes that she can become something. And when you think about the children before the pandemic who are stigmatized because of quote unquote mental illness, they don't believe. They're oppressed in a different way. They're oppressed by being taught that if they just work hard enough, they can be a part of society. Well, why shouldn't they dare to be great? Their minds can be unique. They can be beautiful in a different way. And there's a lot of greats in this world that have contributed to society that are known to have mental illness. And the idea of providing a platform where they can assimilate to successful people, which is the biggest thing that I struggled with when I was going through my manic episode is, all right, therapist, all right, psychiatrist, all right, musician. That's great. That's great. Have you gone through what I'm going through? Do you think that what you're telling me is going to lift me up? It could, but I'm in such a dark, deep hole that I don't understand how I can get out of. But I did. And it was my therapist and psychiatrist who built me up. But it would have been so much easier if there was somebody saying, Jeff, I've gone through this. I'm bipolar. I've attempted suicide. I now am not only a part of society, but I'm leading an organization. And that's the movement we're starting.
And I think just building on that too is the fact that like Jeff had the support, but he didn't have the future concept of who he could be. But when Jeff was diagnosed with bipolar and that he did try to commit suicide, he was already a partner in the firm that he did. His superpowers of being bipolar, of hypomania, and living in that state definitely contributed to it. And that is a superpower of bipolar. But for people, especially like I'm an example that I just quit my career and I was starting on a new one, and being diagnosed with ADHD and having to turn to Adderall. Luckily, I stay in the moment, because if I went back into my past about the people I knew had ADHD and I looked into the future about the people in my family that have ADHD and where they are now, I would think that I'm not capable of much. And it's a very sad reality. But what Jeff was alluding to is that this movement is the freedom of expression and the freedom of information for people on the mental illness range and mental health, that they can accomplish great things and they can be affluent and they can be abundant. And it's also a big message to those who are affluent and are abundant and have a mental illness but are kind of hiding it or don't really talk about it, or don't really do anything about it.
Scared of the stigma?
Yeah, scared of the stigma, or just think it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. And they're struggling too. And they're so strong, so much stronger than quote unquote neurodivergents that are not really dealing with something every single day. And that is what, when Jeff was saying, we are going to win the Nobel Peace Prize, because we are creating a movement of people with a mental illness that are becoming mentors for the next generation. And this is a huge population of our population that will do great things. And when we all do great things, the world can only become a better place.
Joe, let me ask you to partake in a little exercise. I want you to think about somebody that you respect in your life. Maybe a personal hero of yours.
Okay.
All right. You got somebody?
Yes, I have some.
All right. Now imagine that they just told you had a mental illness. Okay. Would that change how you perceive them? No. You already respect them. All right. You can answer.
Would it change how you perceive them?
No.
Yeah, because they're already your hero.
Yes.
And we can be heroes too.
And they already earned your respect.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what people with a mental illness that have different struggles and think differently, or, quote unquote weird, or doing things like, oh my God, they reacted so intense to that. Well, that's okay. Instead of judging, have some compassion.
Yeah.
And that's the big message behind Affluminder and our mission.
Where both of you are going to be so vital is that long after this pandemic is over, and I think the pandemic's going to be over within 6 months to a year.
Yeah, me too.
Unless the criminal wants to keep it going. And I'm talking about, hold on, give me a second. I got to get this thing. Unless I wore this Monday night, and I should wear it again tonight.
Ooh, I mean, you're gonna make me want to get my sweatshirt too. Let me see what yours says.
For almost the better part of a year, I have been wearing this.
Oh yes.
And what he has done to the mental health world is devastating.
Yeah.
Not only has he led to the deaths of 5.6 million people, but how about the hundreds of millions of people that have been, sadly, to the point where their mental health state has been in shambles. And it is so sad.
No one person, independent of where you stand on this, deserves to be God. And we have seen that.
Or the science.
Or the science, right? So
right.
I applaud you.
Yeah. And we definitely do. I mean, we don't think it's just him. We know there's a team behind him. We know that, he may be the face of this, but there's a lot more deeper. And that actually kind of brings us into our part. The next part of Affluminder is that.
And I was going to say that. Yeah. Sorry, Renee. I was just going to say, my apologies to interrupt.
No, you're totally fine because that's a great.
I was going to say that what both of you are doing is incredible work. And God bless both of you for taking the step for a socially healthier way forward.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
And I want to be clear. We know we don't represent all Affluminders. We represent our truth about this topic.
Right.
But the fact that we are Affluminders and you're allowing us to be at the table, allowing us to represent our demographic, that's so important to have this ability to share our story, to have you and hopefully everybody understand what this pandemic is doing to children and mental health, and actually having the demographic that it's affecting, that's lived with it at the table, to be in the room. Alexander Hamilton in that play, Bipolar, by the way, wrote history for us, Bipolar, and we need to be in the room. We need to have a seat at the table.
Yes, exactly. You 100% do.
And one thing that was so funny was, was that we know that we don't represent all Affluminders, but I will say that we have talked to, I think together, probably 20 people to maybe 20, 30 people personally on a personal level that have given us permission to represent their story, to represent them, because we choose to be vulnerable. And vulnerability met with compassion can lead to so many wondrous results.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah,
exactly.
Let's get
it.
We speak for 30 people.
It's okay to say that, there's something wrong. Yep. I have general anxiety. Okay. I see a psychologist on a weekly basis because of that general anxiety. I have had it for years. And you don't blow up to almost 500 pounds if it's not in here.
Right. Exactly.
90, like I've said, 90+% of it for me was psychological.
Thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for speaking.
I've shared it on numerous occasions.
And the fact that
Speak your truth, man.
You did lose, like you said, you lost over 200 pounds.
250.
Like, how does that represent how your mental health is increasing or getting better?
Well, that's the reason why I have to see a psychologist weekly for the rest of my life, is because what happens is your mind, when you're going from 472, that's my peak weight, down to 300 and then below that, your mind, everything just, whatever it is, just changes. It's just everything changes, and it's not necessarily for the better. It's not easy to handle, and that's why every person that hits that weighs well over 400 pounds, every single person, and myself included, hits what they call the mental brick wall.
Wow, I'm not
mental brick wall. It takes years to get rid of because, again, now you're coming out with all these things. Remember, you're not using food as something to calm you down.
Yeah. So
now all these things are coming out, and at times it's not easy. Sadly, I've heard stories of people threatening to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Because the pain was too much. Yeah. You're not handling pain with food anymore, and you're not handling pain with other things. Sadly, some people have transitioned from food to a drug, which is very, very unhealthy. I don't drink or smoke or do drugs of any kind. Yeah. I should have asked from the beginning, and I greatly apologize.
If we do drugs,
me keeping this right behind me for the episode. Quite frankly, I'd like to have that sweatshirt as well as the ivermectin shirt on both sides.
Yeah, if you want to go get it, you're welcome to.
But because quite frankly, something needs to be done to this guy.
Yeah.
This guy, and that's why I made the announcement at the Open that I'm starting a series on mental health because it is needed. It is so sad to hear children crying and complaining about wearing a mask.
Exactly.
And then the one day they get to be free, they're happy. They feel happy.
Yeah, they feel social interaction. It's the first domino, right? The first domino needs to happen, and ultimately, what we believe is that a positive disintegration, which we've heard through some talks, is going to happen in the medical profession. Yeah. No matter what side of this you're on, the medical profession is going to change.
Yep, and that's where Affluminder becomes really important. We were at the Defeat the Mandates. We went to that march in Washington, D.C.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I was just about to bring that up.
I actually want to go grab our sweatshirt about it.
Go right ahead.
Because we actually got
go right ahead.
From here, I'll go grab the sweatshirt if you want
to
describe what we went.
Jeff, a very important question. Okay, ready. So what's happening is that more and more people are having less and less trust in the medical establishment. Yeah. So that is not a good thing in reference to mental health.
It's not. I mean,
trust their doctors. They need to trust them.
Yeah, and you talk about what you do every week. I go to my therapist every week. We go to a couple therapists every week. I see my psychiatrist every 2 to 4 weeks. Luckily for me, I trust my psychiatrist immensely. And imagine going through the trauma I went through and not having somebody that you can trust about medicine, right? And one of the big things about mental illness is people don't want the medicines because it changes, just like you described yourself, it changes who you are. Now, I would argue that this Jeff Meyers is much better than the pre-medicated Jeff Meyers. I love myself. I can enjoy my accomplishments. I enjoy my family very much. Those things I didn't really do before. I was so hyper-focused in my mania of this one thing that it broke my mind. But if I couldn't trust my psychiatrist, if he didn't work with me to develop the right medication, the right amount, the right timing, I don't know. If this would have happened, I don't know if I would have trusted him.
Or if you might just not have been in a good enough spot, because as we all agree on here, and as we have learned from the actual real data and science, there's a lot of the early treatment that was taken out of the hospitals and denied for, and the vaccines are, publicly advertised as safe and effective. And I just even posted on my Facebook multiple times and LinkedIn that we were vaccinated. We did it because, Jeff's job and everybody said it was the right thing to do. And we kind of, like I said in the beginning, I lived in the moment. I didn't really watch the news. I trusted that what they were doing was right. And like everything else, the politicians will take care of it because I trust in our American government. And then it was actually when Jeff started having seizures.
Yeah.
Unexplained by a psychiatrist. That I started looking into this. And then my friend Jessica sent something when I said something to her about Joe Rogan with Robert Malone's episode. I listened to it and I was like, oh my God, what we've been thinking the whole time is true. And I was like, this is I took many virology classes. I was a biochemistry undergrad, genetics, RNA, mRNA. My final thesis, I guess, my capstone project, whatever, in my senior year of college was in epigenetics. So I knew a lot of what I knew about the basic virology, which basically could have solved this. And it was really, I went down that rabbit hole. And as you know now, on all my social media platforms, I'm a big advocate. I've had friends, family, strangers tell me to back off. That someone called me a terrorist. They're like, you don't know what you're getting involved in. And I sent them my personal information. I said, you're welcome to come sit down and talk to me. I'm not a threat. I'll bring my dog. We'll be fine. But yeah.
We talk about trusting the healthcare system and this positive disintegration. One of the things we're concerned about is I have an MRI set up because of these seizures, and I'll go into that a little bit. And the way we're approaching it is not to bring up our thoughts on what we believe in personally with the vaccine.
Well, that's because I was scheduled an MRI appointment, and we live in Cleveland. There's about 3 hospitals that I can name, but I'm not going to name which one. But I called the doctor's office and wanted to get an MRI, a neurologist appointment.
Which my psychiatrist highly recommended.
Exactly, because none of his medications were causing
Yeah.
it. And I let them know I was really about the vaccine and everything with just like blood clots in general. And I hear a cardiologist too, and the nurse was like, "Well, it sounds like you have more of a COVID question. Let me get you to the COVID thing." I was like, "No, this is or not nurse, the administration." And they're like, "Well, that's not exactly what the neurologists do." And she's very adamant. She's like, "There's no adverse side effects about the vaccine. It's safe and effective. And when the boosters come out, we should still get it." And I was literally like screaming at her on the phone. So I called another neurologist and I was like, "Hey, like, we have a referral." Well, no, I told you.
About screaming, I didn't know.
Oh, I didn't tell you about screaming part. I always leave that part out. But then I told the other one, I was like, "Hey, I have a referral from my husband's psychiatrist for neurologist," and I did not mention the vaccine because I learned from the previous phone call, and that alone was pretty real enough to know that we can't trust the medical field right now.
And I want to show the sweatshirt.
So as we said, because we don't trust that, we did go to defeat the mandates because we know the mandates are illegal, un-American. So we have matching sweatshirts. This is Mackenzie's. So she is an Affluminder wiener for freedom.
Oh, that's so cute. Just a little more to the center.
Yep. And an Affluminder wiener is a psychiatric service dog for an Affluminder. And I'm an Affluminder for freedom, and Jeff is an Affluminder for freedom. And that was the first movement that our business, pre-business, is doing, because we believe in freedom for all and freedom of information.
Before COVID, we believed in that, and it took us a while to figure out how to describe it. Right, Affluminder is somebody who believes in the affluency and abundancy, a free-flowing mind. And fluid, the etymology of that is a river, and so what we are is abundant-minded, free-flowing minds. That's what Affluminder is.
I'll explain it in like a more like kind of fun way. We actually, I have my own interior design company, construction design, and we had a deadline to do, but we also work on other projects, and he's a CEO of our job. So we actually pulled an all-nighter. We were awake for 25 hours at that point. Very tired, but in that zone, like, we have to finish this. So I dropped off the construction documents at the building department, architect here, engineer here, and we were done. We went down for lunch to the neighborhood restaurant down under our apartment, and we're sitting there, we're talking about this, and I was like, we were discussing that we needed the word to replace somebody with a mental illness, because the only words that you have are like crazy or weird or psychopath or lunatic to describe somebody with a mental illness. There's nothing positive. The most positive one you have is patient or neurodivergent, which a lot of people miss in conversation. And we're talking about this, and we're very into affirmations. We're very spiritual. So we do abundancy and prosperity affirmations. And one of our goals is to become affluent in love, in money, in great relationships. We want a free flowing of all this amazing stuff that really gives us our life a purpose and enables us to do a lot of great things with it. Enjoyable, helping other people, all for good causes. So we're sitting there, and abundancy and affluence is how we got Affluminder. The minder is like a mind, like the brain. So that's pretty self-explanatory, but that's how we came up with the word. 25 hours of no sleep.
That's really, really something else. I want to get into the pyramid.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is your creation, Jeff. Is that correct?
Yes. And it's been said in some different ways prior, Maslow's theory and stuff, but nothing specific to the journey that somebody with mental illness likely goes on. From my experience and talking to some others, it's similar. And
what I want you to do is I want you to spend a little bit of time talking about the different phases of the pyramid, going from the bottom. And again, this is all the rehabilitative path, from the bottom up to the top of self-purpose, which is just,
Yeah.
they all are interconnected. And when one of them breaks, that's where things break down in the human body.
Yeah. So for me, if you remember being abandoned, having the trauma, specifically, I had the pyramid upside down. And my self-purpose, my only self-purpose was love. I wanted to find love because I wanted to recreate what a mother's love is supposed to be to a child. And so my pyramid was upside down. And so every time a relationship or anything like that kind of went sideways, my whole pyramid fell over. And every time I was, focusing on love, relationship, I would start to focus on career, and then maybe I'd get to my family and friends, and then the relationship would take a hit, and my whole pyramid would fall over. And so I was describing this and to my therapist, and she says, "You're an architect. You should draw what you're describing." And so what I discovered is it started with this notion. All right, Jeff, you got to get working out. It makes you feel better. It's endorphins. It's science. Just start to walk again. I mentioned I ran the Boston Marathon. I couldn't run a mile without like bending over. I was at 3 miles. I was throwing up, and so I had
years later.
Years later. Years later.
Time and place setting.
Yeah, sorry. And I had to start with this physical stuff. And once I got myself feeling more confident about my physical, I started going in depth again with intellectual stuff, reading books, lots of business books I liked, rereading about architects that inspired me. And so then I was building my intellectual piece of it. And then I found myself being able to be more vulnerable emotionally. In the bottom tier of this pyramid, it's about self-reflection, right? I was able to admit that I had made mistakes. I was able to admit that I had a lot of work to do emotionally. And then finally, the idea that the world is bigger than myself, right? Spiritually. So, physically builds to intellectually, builds to emotional vulnerability, all inside, and to the notion that there's a spirituality to humans, and it's bigger than us, be it religion, be it not religion in the universe, however you want to say it. We're meant to be spiritual. We're meant to connect to each other and know that the world's bigger than us. Once you build yourself, right, you can start to move past that and go back to quote unquote society. You can start to be with your family and friends again. I admit, and it's one of those things I got through with emotion and spiritual, I was a big burden on my family and my friends. I had to create a safety team of 5 individuals who could follow me on my phone and know exactly where I was, so I wouldn't go back to the bridge, right? And
where he tried to commit suicide.
Yeah, where I tried to commit suicide. And I was able to be integrated into my family and friends again, and actually be, instead of toxic to them, I was actually able to be a benefit and someone who brought more value to the group than I took away. And once I had that support, it's when I was like, all right, Jeff, you can be a CEO. You can do this, refocus on your career, rebuild the relationships that you had. And then ultimately you get self-purpose. And I realized that I have many self-purposes and that love is just one of them. And I was able to build myself. And about that time, my therapist told me this would happen, is that the person I was meant to be with would find me. Once I built myself, they would come. And all of a sudden, love was the result of this, not love being the first step. And then I realized you have many self-purposes. Affluminder is a self-purpose, creating a global change. Being a CEO is a purpose. Being a consultant and public speaking is a purpose. Being a great husband is one of those purposes. And so when you build yourself properly through this rehabilitative path for mental illness, you end up at the top of the paradigm. So many people with mental illnesses are focused on one thing, and that's some of what's wrong with the medical profession and the way they treat people with mental illnesses is they're focused so much on one thing that you can never get the chance to build the rest of your life. And that's the pyramid that you see here.
And as I said, every single part, no matter how low or how high it is all interconnected.
It is.
Right. And that's because you could actually work on all this stuff at once, but the self-purpose, what we found, it takes a lot more. Like for physical, it, like even as you start like losing weight, like it's eating healthier and working out, but that does affect your intellectual.
Yes.
And that's something that like each one, like, yeah, physically you can get into shape. That's totally fine. But you're not a robot,
It actually affects the emotional maybe more than even the physical.
Yeah. Exactly. And then that could also affect by consequence how you react to your family and friends, and how you react to your career, how you react to your failures at your career, how you react to your successes. And that could really skew. And I think this is, I think there's a lot of good in the world. I've learned in Cleveland that some people are not that good, but it skews your self-purpose. That when some people have the entire bottom, but something isn't totally right, the other ones come easily, and the self-purpose is skewed to something that's not so good or beneficial for society. So I think it's really important to make sure that your morals are also there. And that kind of goes with spirituality.
Yeah. Spirituality is so vital. And that's something that I am currently working on, trying to improve. And it's a long journey. And again, going back, I want to go back to this. A lot of things are, now that I think about this, not just mental health, but you think about all the different things that, someone might go through. This pyramid's really, really good. This is a really, really great concept.
I told you got to put it up and bring it up, because it's literally, it's applied to so many parts of our life. We want to start a family soon, and we have to build our own pyramid.
And the problem with society is they keep people with mental illness, right, wrong, and different. This is the way it's been. They keep people at or below that first level. Right. They do not. They say you could get to the second level, right? And there are a lot of organizations out there that talk about thriving, right? And the key is giving the skill sets to the ability to thrive. That's where this paradigm shift in the medical world needs to happen.
And it's also with, if you look at that pyramid, if you want to put it back up real quick, it's physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual are separated. Obviously, they teeter-totter on each other. What the medical profession, and this is not for all of them, because we have researched other facilities that are trying to not do this, but physical also includes the medications you take. Correct. Whether you self-medicate with alcohol, with drugs, whether I take Adderall, whether I take vitamins, whether Jeff takes all his medicines. So the physical will impact the intellectual and emotional and the spiritual. Because if, like, I'm on Adderall and I'm just focused on what I'm doing, I'm not feeling the high vibration. I'm not going to yoga. It's a very different feeling when I'm on it and when I'm off of it. And that's a big part of the medical field, is that they're taking like the physical part and they're having such control over it. And it's manipulating to the point where like it actually like leaches into the other parts in a very unhealthy way. Gotcha. And that's where like part of having people with a mental illness, people that are experiencing this and actually working on this pyramid, having them at the seat of the table when the medical field, the medical industry rebuilds after the pandemic, is so vital, that they don't keep us in the same way or lockdown for the rest of our lives.
And imagine physical, the masks on children.
Yeah,
it's a very simple, straightforward, not a theoretical medicine. I believe in it, I don't believe in it. The masks are a physical thing that are prohibiting, most importantly, I think, in the lockdowns, the emotional ability to connect to other humans. We need to see smiles. We need to see teeth. We need to see laughing. And you're taking that away from children. Like, that's a physical barrier, and it's a simple one.
Exactly. I mean, and especially the fact that there was overwhelming evidence, the CDC's numbers show it, that children do very, very well with COVID. So if we know that cloth masks don't work, CDC said it, and if we know very few children die of it, as a matter of fact, in 2 years combined, if you look at the 2 years of COVID and then the previous 2 years with the flu, as many people died from COVID per year as from the flu per year. Again, CDC. So why are we, one, locking them up, two, putting them in remote schooling? I was listening to the Barry Weiss interview that she was on Bill Maher a couple weeks ago, and she said that in Flint, Michigan, they're going back to remote learning.
Yeah, our staff here
Indefinitely.
building.
They want to keep them remote learning, and the people that are being affected the most are in the minority communities and in the inner cities.
Right,
which
my
is
sisters,
worse.
because a lot of them don't have access to internet, whether it's just in their neighborhood or because it's a budget thing, and especially now with childcare, it's and I'm going to get into adverse effects of the vaccine.
You want my opinion? Why
we'll get into adverse effects, but Jeff, go.
Why is that happening? It's called censoring. It's called not being an American. It's called lack of information, lack of sharing facts. Last time I checked, that's what America's built on.
Being a messiah, and he never wants this thing to come to an end.
George Washington
wants it to come to an end.
Well, because it's a state of emergency, and the vaccines aren't viable. They're not legal in if it's not a state of emergency.
I respectfully disagree with you. I believe it's his pocket. I believe all he cares about is how much money he is making.
George Washington encouraged Thomas Jefferson to disagree with him. That's how this country is built.
Yes, of course.
By democracy, by discussions, by disagreements.
By
we're not a socialism.
Right, exactly.
Yet.
The doctors don't even all agree with each other on things.
And that's okay.
But you know what that's called?
Research?
Science. That's called science.
Well,
it is, because science always changes.
Yes, it's live.
Yes. No doctor. It's interesting because every doctor I have talked to, I have had, this is now the 16th podcast episode about, I would say, I will say between 5 and 8 episodes I've had with doctors.
Yeah. But like it is, I mean, I'm not a conspiracist, but like the more I learn, the scarier it is. And where they do like the simple thing that I was telling Jeff about today was watching Russell Brand and doing my own research about it was that he went into Neil Diamond. Neil Diamond, wanted to take his music off Spotify. Joe Rogan wasn't taken off. Just another app to censor him. Yeah.
Neil Young.
Oh, Neil Young, not Neil Diamond. Neil Young.
Little difference.
But they were talking about, I am not his fan. Not. I just don't know that music, right? But like, doing the research on that, they were basically saying that like the group that he was that bought his like rights, like his music rights, or now he's a client of, the former CEO of Pfizer became like a board member. And it was just, there's a lot of connections in all these articles. I skimmed them. I didn't read them, but there was a lot of Blackstone Group and Pfizer involved. And I looked at Jeff and I was like, I don't think Neil had a choice. Like he was given a phone call and he's like, you have to do this. And this is what we're doing. So, I mean, I don't think Fauci's a good guy at all, but I do think that he is a team. And I do think that he's a face and he's like a sacrifice.
Massively. But he's one of the leaders of that team.
Oh, duh. Of course.
Because now where you're 100% right, and this is another thing that's very nefarious, is if you watch mainstream media, which you probably don't.
We don't.
I've good that you don't. But you go on CBS, ABC, NBC, all of them, CNN, MSNBC. You will notice that they have specific sponsors. And a huge sponsor of theirs is Big Pharma, in particular now, Pfizer.
Yeah.
And it is unbelievable watching sporting events or watching anything.
It really is.
In seeing, this is sponsored by Pfizer. This is sponsored by Moderna.
We believe we represent the science. Renee has the background. Well, she has the research.
We believe we're on the right side of history.
We do, but
we're not researchers.
That's a better way to say it.
Yeah,
but I want to add that if you're being sponsored by Big Pharma, how could you say anything negative about them? I cannot go on CBS and say Pfizer's killing all our kids, I'd be fired in a heartbeat.
You know, and that's a big thing with anything. I mean, like even you had to work with like your job about that, and we were talking today about whether like who we should mention. We're talking to collaborating, and we were like, well, we don't want to we don't know everyone's opinion, so out of respect, we're not going to do that. But at the same time, it's like,
right,
with Affluminder, like we were even talking like, do we want to take such a big stance for Affluminder for freedom? And we're like, well, this is one of our core values. And if we do not take a stance on what we believe in, we are in violation. And therefore, we really shouldn't proceed with this venture.
Yeah, in the debate that people can have, and we have our own personal opinions, right? But the debate that we are allowed to have as Americans is a right for all Affluminders. And the way Affluminders, the way people with mental illness are treated when they enter the medical system, there's no freedom. Locked in a psych ward, not allowed to leave your room. And if there are approaches, one's called an empath unit. That was Dr. Scott Zeller. He's talked about this, and the idea that you enter into an emergency room and you have a broken bone and you should go one way. You're having a medical trauma, you should go the other way. For me, I was locked in a still box. I was watched by an armed guard and a psychiatric nurse. And I was in the ER with everybody else. And I heard the codes go off. And I heard African-American male, 2 gunshots, stat, whatever they say. I don't know, beyond me. I was in a trauma myself. And he ended up dying. And I ended up hearing him die while I was in my own mental trauma. What happens if I would have went in and instead of going to the left, I went to the right into what's called an empath unit, a psychological place of safety that you can go to. It's proven that if you do that, you can come out of the hospital in 24 to 48 hours, just like somebody that has some type of cardiovascular issue versus being put in the psych ward for 12 days. I mean, it's.
And with that, it's like, you know, once you're in the psych ward, like he was saying, you don't really have your freedom. You're also given like medication that you don't know, you don't understand. And you have no free will but to trust the doctor. So if you don't take the medications, you're not cooperating. And you're not getting back to life. And we don't, one of our things that we're exploring is brain scans. And this is from Dr. David Amen. I think David's his first name. Yeah. He wrote a book that was called, I had it here. It was, Your Brain is Always Listening. Tame the Hidden Dragons That Control Your Happiness, Habits, and Hangups. He also is founder of the Amen Clinics, which we actually called, and we're waiting to the right time to really be the first patients of the Affluminder community to do this, but to get our brain scans. And they look at, I don't really understand the science about this because, like I said, I'm not a physician, but they look at what's in your brain that's causing like certain symptoms of our mental illness. And they then put you on a treatment plan with a doctor and a psychiatrist that you talk to. And they put you on the road to thriving. What they're missing from mainstream mental health and a lot of mental health like therapists that I've seen, I've been through 4 therapists in the last 2 years, 3 psychiatrists, because they don't do that. They never give me the promise of thriving. They never tell me that I can do this. When I tell them that I want to accomplish great things, they're kind of like, okay, well, first you have to stop overreacting. And I'm like, well, I feel like what I'm doing is ADHD has ADHD meltdowns, where my sense of feeling the reaction is actually proper, but my outward emotion to it is not always socially proper. For example, yelling at like the woman at Dunkin' Donuts for, putting like heavy cream in like my fat-free latte, something like that. Me right now hitting the desk is why it keeps moving. You know what I'm saying? Like I get like really excited about little things. And that's something that like is really going to benefit in the medical world.
Oh, long-term, definitely. Long-term, It will definitely benefit.
Even short-term, if that's implemented right after COVID, and that's going to be one of the things we are looking to partner with and really push for Affluminders, that is something that after dealing with it, people that have anxiety and depression from the pandemic, like things like masks or vaccine adverse effects, and watching the parents fight about this and lose their jobs over this and not understanding why.
I'm glad you are transitioning here because
that is definitely
I want to bring up vaccine adverse effects and mental health, because this is a topic that no one has talked about at all. And I clearly know
that we can find
that sadly, those who have tragically either died, which would affect the family's mental health, or have had myocarditis or pericarditis or any other horrible adverse reaction to the vaccines.
Yeah. And there's also that group of people that do not want to get vaccinated but are being bullied. And that is happening in the adult world.
Well,
it's happening to replace, literally, Jeff even said it. No one's allowed to talk about the vaccine at his job because either if they're going to censor him, he's going to censor them. And that's how it has to be, because that type of bullying is very unhealthy in the workplace.
So let's talk about adverse side effects.
Yes,
I've been on medication going on 7 years. I've never had a seizure. I'm not saying it's an adverse side effect, but there's proof about brain clots. There's proof about the And I was walking one day and I lost ability very slowly over a 3-hour period to actually move. I went from being normal to slowly walking to shuffling to standing in the kitchen, and Renee wasn't home, and I was having a seizure, not the way that you might think about it from TV. I was completely cognitive of everything going around. I was cognitive of my shaking. I was cognitive of why the heck can't I move my body? And, I ended up finally being able, once I stopped and I had a little movement, I leaned against the wall and I slid down the wall and I was on the ground. And I was there and I was like, just breathe, stay alive, just breathe, stay alive. And Renee came in from down the hallway and I just started trying to yell help, but I couldn't even really yell help. And so like the only thing that's changed in my life is the vaccine. And again, I don't know that it's a vaccine. I'm not a medical professional, but I don't know what else it could be. I've had two. I don't know what else it could be. And I explained this to my psychiatrist, and luckily I have a great personal relationship with him. And his response was, yeah, it's proven to be related to potentially that. I want you to go get an MRI. And like, I'm a healthy individual. And you talk about the kids and the hearts, and oh my gosh.
It's sad. It's sad. I mean, you can only imagine their mental health must be devastated because they went from healthy to now they're debilitated.
Right.
Then, of course, there's the Maddie DeGaray story, which is a whole different ball of wax altogether, where Pfizer completely lied about her. And now you imagine the mental health of a paraplegic. That young girl is such a brave person.
I know.
Yeah.
I know if they're friends that had to watch it and like conflicted, between like what parents are saying and teachers are saying and other kids are saying. And it's, imagine 10 years from now looking back and reading the history books or reading the science and being like, wow, like my best friend died or my friend died or my classmate died because of something with a vaccine, which now, like you sent me the art, like we read about like those people that like went against like, or maybe someone else has sent it to me, like against parent consent and got the vaccine at 12 years old. And these kids are taking a stance based on social,
wanting to be social.
Yeah. But social pressure.
Yeah, bullying.
More than ever we've ever had before because of social media, because of everything you see. I mean, one of my Facebook posts were like taken down, and it's like, okay, so now they're going to have that guilt on themselves in 10 years.
Exactly. Well, this generation is going to look at this time and our medical profession. I tell you, it's not going to be good.
There's going to be a positive disintegration, and we have an opportunity.
We do.
We and everybody have an opportunity to hopefully rebuild the way the healthcare system in America works, which we all know. We've all agreed for years it's broken, and this proves that it's broken.
We need to go back to the system of individualism, where everyone is treated as an individual, not in a one-size-fits-all, not where a 5-year-old girl is treated the same way as an 80-year-old man.
Yeah, but even when you say individualism, like I remember like just helping someone studying in med school about this and reading like their oral exams. And their oral exams was in 15 minutes. You have to understand the diagnosis and what it could be. And it was literally like a guess who kind of game. Like it was like, if I say 5 out of 10 things, it could be one of these 100 things. And it's like they had 15 minutes to get in and out. And I remember looking at this book and I was like, this doesn't make sense, because like I don't actually always like open up to my doctors right away. Like I kind of just not even like mistrust, but just because I forget about things and I'm really like, maybe I ran that day or maybe I didn't, and I feel bad.
No, I understand that, but what I'm talking about is that we are all different. There is no two people alike. So that's the point, is that we need to go back to a system where people are treated as individuals rather than having this box, and they put everybody in that same box.
Now, what system? Because I don't know of a system off the top of my head from history, but I do know like what I know of, like just knowing some med school students and talking to doctors and doing my own research on it, like from in the medical field, like the pharmaceutical company does help fund a lot of things, and it does help fund salaries like insurance companies do.
Yes.
Now that's another predicament, because like doctors do go to school for a really long time, and it's a very if you want to go back to that, you don't have to bring up the pyramid, but you want to go back to that pyramid about like staying in physical shape. They don't really have time to, as a lot of doctors are forced to stay up 24 hours. Now, intellectual, they're studying tons of things that they may never ever see, but they have to remember. That's a lot of pressure. Emotional, they watch someone code, they watch someone die, they have to deal with the child, and even just being like seeing that devastation. Now try to talk spiritual. They're only taught medicine because they don't have room for it. The entire medical system doesn't just need to be revamped from individualism. It has to go to med school on how we take care of the mental health of physicians.
100% right. But not just that. What we also need to do is we need to change the entire upper education system. The entire college structure and university structure needs to completely be overhauled. Because what unfortunately has happened is that professors are in there spewing. Unfortunately, they're just spewing absolute garbage. And that makes things even worse.
But I would say that there's too many university systems to say that. There's all my college experiences haven't been like over liberal or over conservative. Mine was science, so it's basically based on science. But like, I don't think all university systems are the same.
See, this could be where the difference comes in, because in the meteorological field, there's a lot of spewing, and everyone's talking about what's next after COVID. And if you've heard, they want to start going with climate change very hardcore. And over 90% of the opinions of climate change are pretty much on the pro side of things. And the reason being is because over 90% of the money that the federal government distributes is given to colleges and universities to say, this is what they do. These are for the projects for pro-climate change. If it was 50-50 like it should be, then we would have a nice discussion. Again, that's science.
See, that I don't know about.
Money has taken over. Money and the federal government and governments around the world have just thrown money to these upper institutions and saying, here's money, promote climate change. Even though for 50 years now, the opinion used to be global cooling, then it's global warming, now it's climate change, because they don't know what's going on. Then you've had and I'm sorry, I'm going to off topic and I'll go right back in a second. Then you've had those who have already made incorrect predictions. Like Al Gore saying that Battery Park would be completely underwater by 2016. And I could go right now from here to Battery Park and just walk by. But that's the problem, is that science shouldn't be that way. Science is among doctors or scientists having a free-flowing discussion, like you said before.
Yeah,
And
but
that's
you also
what we
remember,
need
you
to go back
also
to.
did your own research. Like, that's kind of why, like, I think I avoided the mainstream media during the pandemic. And I also kind of did what I wanted. Because when my dad, who has really, really bad asthma to like where he can't sleep on a normal night, and I also suffer from that often, and allergies, when he came out fine, and my mom pumping with vitamins and taking good care of him, keeping him hydrated and stuff, I was like, we got this. I'm not worried about it.
You brought up an excellent point. Because you have a condition, like I have had a chronic blood disorder for the better part of a quarter of a century. I have to be careful about what I put into my body. So everything that I'm recommended by a doctor, I have to research it. I have to look it up. I have to see what's in it and what potential side effects. Sadly, what has happened is through the years, because I've received bad advice from doctors, I've lost trust. And this was well before COVID. I've gone through 4 hematologists, and the one that I liked the most, sadly, retired.
Yeah.
And now I'm going through this again. So, and I've had issues with primary care physicians. I'm actually one of the worst patients around because so few people question.
Are you the best patient around?
Well, you're the best.
No, I'm the worst for them.
Yeah.
I might be one of the best around, period. But
Yes.
I am one of the worst for them.
And that's what they hate. From the doctors I knew, they were like, oh, somebody came in and said like WebMD. And I was like, well, maybe they're just doing their own research, because like, honestly, like not everything, like I literally once went to this doctor conference, right? And like my face was swollen. I was on the train in New York City and my face was weird. And I was like, my face is weird. I'm with like 8 other doctors. And I'm like, do you see something weird? They're like, no, you're fine. And I'm like, no, like I can't move my face. Like I think I have an issue, like something. I don't know what it is. And they're like, you're fine. So I go to the bathroom, like my makeup's messed up. They're like, maybe just put ice on it. You're swelling. I'm like, well, why am I swollen? And it turns out to be like a bacteria from like my, I had like an infection abscess that like was from my Invisalign that like went up, but it went all the way up to my eye that like, they literally just bring cold compresses on it. I go to the emergency room the next day. And like I'm like, I was literally at a doctor, like med school dance or whatever it was. And I'm like, you guys literally can't even help me. You're not even telling me to go to get this fixed. Like there's no state of emergency. There's no compassion. Like, it's like,
And this goes back to my cousin, mental illness, lost trust because they kept on making him a zombie. And he was in and out. Yeah, through medicine, in and out. He felt like he couldn't be open. I talked to my aunt about this, and he felt like he couldn't be open about it. He'd go to job interviews and he couldn't be open about his mental illness. And he got to the point where he committed suicide. And it's because he lost trust in the medical system. He lost the ability in his own mind that he could ever be okay because the medical system was not doing him justice.
right. And that was all he had to rely on.
That's all.
And that's why what's going on now is very scary.
How can we get that trust back?
Well, I think that it definitely starts in medical school. And like, I guess in upper universities, like you were saying, because that's where people decide to go to medical school. But we have to build their pyramid, and they have to build their pyramid, and they have to know how to build it in their patients.
And specifically with the intellectual part of the pyramid, again, I think we all agree that the children that are currently going through this pandemic are going to have mental health things that they have to overcome that no generation has ever had to overcome. And we need to be prepared to help them regain normalcy and also the ability to thrive. And in order to do that, and I don't mean to beat the same war chest over and over again, we need to be at the table. We need to be there because we experience these things. They actually happen to us. We didn't read about them in a book. We didn't learn about them at a university. Those are all important things. But we need to be at the table to help influence how we can help people independent of the vaccine and the pandemic that all existed before, but it's accelerated now. And it's going to be even worse. And we've been told when we tell the story, when we have these discussions, that it's the right time. It's the perfect timing that people with mental illnesses, we tried to find a politician
We did. We tried to find a politician that would talk openly about the mental illness. So if you know one, we would be interested.
Because that's our way. That's a way in, right? That's someone we can assimilate. They would understand us, but we haven't found that yet.
That's a shame.
Yes,
that is a shame, and it's.
We're not saying they're not out there. We're just saying that they're not.
They're not Affluminders.
They may not even know.
Well, they might.
They're dealing with so much already. The problem is they have no idea that the amount of money that's going to be spent on mental health in the next decade is going to be beyond what they think. I can only imagine.
I know. Well, now if you want to get certified as a psychologist, you should.
It is just unreal, and it is just so sad what we have done. As I've said before, I want to ask you one final question, and I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight. And I hope you can come on again very, very soon, because as I said, I'm doing a series on this because this is such an important topic, and I want to beat it to the brow. I want to beat it to the brow where we have to talk about this. This is so vital in all aspects, not just COVID, not just the lockdowns, not just the mask wearing, but definitely also the vaccines.
Yep.
And what I want to ask is, for someone that's watching this that needs help or does not want to admit that they need help, what should they do? What are the steps that they should take to get better, to improve their mental state and their mental health?
Well, if they need a friend, they're welcome to message us on Facebook at Affluminder. As you're going to put the Facebook there, we are compassionate. And that is something that we're about. As Affluminders, we like to reach down or reach to the side or even up and really help Affluminders thrive. So if they need a friend or they just want to vent, they're welcome to do that. And they'll get a real person, which is only one of us.
and you go back to the pyramid again. You got a team here working for you. Take the first step. I met an individual who went through trauma, and his wife knows, but his own parents, he's an adult. He's successful. He's afraid to even tell his own parents. Take the step when you're ready, beyond yourself, to tell your friends and your family. Mm-hmm. They should be there for you. Take that first step. And then when you get strength, take the next step and tell a stranger about it. You'd be surprised. I've been telling this story for 3 years. I've only had 2 bad experiences. I've had hundreds of compassion. I've had hundreds of others share their stories with me. Invite others to the table. Yep. They're afraid of the unknown. When you normalize it yourself, you invite them. Don't blame them. Invite them to the table. Exactly. And that's the way we can all improve together and just realize, I don't have a mental illness. I have a mental uniqueness, and I have a superpower.
Yep. And that helps looking at that pyramid. Do whatever you can to get physically active, get those endorphins flowing, to research on your mental illness and to research what other people with that mental illness is doing.
Don't blame yourself emotionally. No. You didn't do anything wrong.
Go to that intellectual box and do your own research on it, and you'll find that you have more than just this team here, and you're not alone.
And that comes back to the spiritual. So build yourself.
So that's our answer.
This is an incredible pyramid. And what I'm going to do is at the end of this podcast, for the final 25 to 30 seconds, I'm just going to put up that pyramid.
Yeah.
And what I may do is, moving forward for commercials, because I'm starting to create, or I'd like to start to create, a number of commercials when I go to breaks on the podcast. I'm going to use this in particular.
As long as you put www.affluminder.com below it.
Of course I will.
You can use it as much as you want, brother.
As a matter of fact, you reminded me that to find out more about Affluminder, go to affluminder.com. And Jeffrey and Renee, I want to thank you both for coming on. Please, let's we will continue with this series. And as I said, I'm going to continue on with this because, again, we're going to be talking about this long after the actual COVID pandemic comes to an end.
We're starting a paradigm shift, and it starts with a small fire, and we will change the world, and we will win the Nobel Peace Prize together, all of us.
30 years or less.
30 years or less.
Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Joe, also for having us.
Really
and I want to thank everyone who has watched tonight's Joe's Place podcast. I hope everyone has a great rest of the week and upcoming weekend. And I will have more podcast episodes next week. I will have, I have confirmed already a fitness expert, and we're going to talk about the physical part of things. Really great story coming next week. I'm trying to working on getting more guests on, but again, if you want to find out more about Affluminder and Jeff and Renee, go to affluminder.com, as well as you can follow them on Facebook, as well as their YouTube channel, which I did not show. I'm going to show this real quick.
We only have one video because we're so new.
And this is a great video. I highly recommend this 18-minute and 47-second video. It's a really great video.
Thank you.
And I highly recommend that everyone watches this. Once again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great night and a great upcoming weekend. Thank you.
You too, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.